here to help you today. Use this weapon to fall asleep. So before you begin,
My fire will not avail you!
Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from? And what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The halls of Moria stretched into the abyss, vast and ancient, carved with the echoes of ages long past. Here, deep beneath the mountains, time itself seemed to hold its breath, and the very stones whispered secrets of power and ruin. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, disturbed only by the flickering light of Gandalf's staff as he stood upon the narrow bridge. His robes, dulled by the dust of countless battles, stirred slightly in the cold, dead air. Before him, wreathed in fire and shadow, loomed a nightmare from the elder days. The Balrog of Morgoth, a being of flame and darkness, ancient beyond reckoning, rose to its full height, its molten eyes burning with an intelligence both cruel and endless. Smoke curled from its massive frame, and as it took a step forward, the stone beneath its hooves blackened and cracked. Moment, the world stood still. The bridge was narrow, suspended over a chasm so deep that no mortal had ever measured its end. The Balrog exuded an aura of primordial terror, a presence so heavy that even the air itself trembled under its weight. Yet Gandalf did not yield. He had faced horrors before, had stood against darkness in forms beyond imagining. But this foe, this creature of the First Age, was unlike any he had battled before. It was not merely a beast of ray and ruin. It was something deeper, something older, something tied to the very fabric of Arda itself. The Fellowship, standing far behind, watched in frozen silence. They did not understand the depth of the battle about to unfold, did not see beyond the fire and the sword, the staff and the light. To them, it was a clash between a wizard and a monster, between light and darkness. But Gandalf knew the truth. This was not simply a fight. It was something written in the bones of the earth, something that had waited for ages to awaken. The Balrog moved first. With a speed that defied its size, it lashed out, its massive flaming sword cutting through the air like a streak of molten metal. Gandalf raised Glamdring in response, meeting the strike with a force that sent shockwaves rippling through the chamber. Sparks erupted from the impact, golden and red, light and shadow battling for dominance. The bridge beneath them groaned in protest, as if unwilling to bear witness to the war between these two ancient beings. With a bellow that shook the very foundations of Moria, the Balrog swung again. Gandalf stepped forward, unyielding, his staff raised high. Power crackled around him, unseen currents of magic woven into the very words he spoke. "You cannot pass." The words rang through the cavern like a bell tolling in the dark. They were more than a command. They were a declaration, a final, unbreakable law against the chaos that sought to consume all. The Balrog hesitated, It had fought battles beyond count, had razed kingdoms to ash, had stood before lords of war, and slaughtered them where they stood. And yet, something in the wizard's voice, in the unwavering certainty of his stance, gave it pause. The hesitation lasted but a breath. With renewed fury, the demon raised its whip of fire, the coils writhing like living serpents, trailing smoke and heat in their wake. It struck, the whip slicing through the air, aiming to drag the wizard into the abyss. But Gandalf was ready. With a burst of light, his staff met the attack, unraveling the flames as though they were mere threads of a tapestry. The Balrog let out a roar, frustration lacing its guttural voice, its wings unfurling, great and black as a storm cloud. But there was no wind to carry it, no sky to lift it, only the ancient weight of stone and time. And Gandalf, standing firm, knowing that this moment, this battle, was not just for himself. It was for all who walked the path of light. The bridge trembled beneath their feet, the ancient stone groaning under the weight of forces beyond mortal comprehension. The Balrog's flames burned hotter, its presence darkening the air, filling the cavern with an oppressive heat that made the very walls seem to sweat. Gandalf gripped his staff tightly, feeling the raw power coursing through the veins of Moria, a power older than even this creature of shadow and fire. He could hear the whispers in the stone, echoes of the past, of battles fought long before the world took the shape it knew now. The demon's wings, though insubstantial as smoke, spread wide, casting shadows that danced like living things along the crumbling bridge. It was a being of ruin, forged in the deepest pits of the world's first darkness, a servant of Morgoth who had outlived its master, lurking in the depths of the earth, waiting. And now, it had found a challenge worth its fury. With another mighty roar, it surged forward, its sword a streak of molten gold cutting through the gloom. Gandalf met it with Glamdring, the elven blade catching the fire, absorbing the heat, flashing bright as it parried the devastating blow. Sparks cascaded like falling stars, illuminating the vastness of the cavern, revealing for the briefest moment the shattered remnants of a kingdom that had once been great. The battle was not one of brute strength alone. It was a contest of will, of essence, of two opposing forces colliding in a place where time itself seemed to slow. Every strike of Glamdring against the demon's blade sent ripples of energy through the bridge, through the very rock of Moria, as though the mountain itself was bearing witness. The runes carved into the walls, long thought dead, pulsed faintly, responding to the sheer magnitude of power being unleashed. The fellowship stood frozen, their breath stolen by the spectacle before them. They had known fear, had seen death lurking in the dark places of the world. But this was something else. Aragorn's hand clenched around his sword, instinct screaming for him to act. do something, but he knew, as they all did, that this was beyond them. This was a battle fought on a scale they could not touch, a battle written into the fabric of the world itself. The Balrog struck again, its whip cracking through the air, splitting stone where it landed. Gandalf barely sidestepped in time, the heat searing even through the protection of his magic. He gritted his teeth, adjusting his stance, knowing he could not afford even a moment's weakness. The enemy before him was not simply a creature of fire, it was darkness incarnate, a shadow of the First Age, the last remnants of an evil so ancient that even Sauron himself was but a student in comparison. You shall not pass. The words echoed again, spoken with the force of an unbreakable command. Gandalf drove his staff into the bridge, and at once, the magic woven into the stone answered. A pulse of white light erupted outward, slamming into the Balrog like a wave of thunder. The great beast staggered, its form shuddering, as though for the first time in an age, it felt the weight of true resistance. The bridge cracked beneath them, veins of light spreading through the stone, as though the earth itself sought to end the battle in one final act. The Balrog let out a furious bellow, gathering its strength, preparing to bring the full force of its ancient might down upon the wizard who dared stand in its path. Gandalf did not waver. His grip on Glamdring tightened, his heart steady, his purpose clear. This was not just a fight for survival. This was something greater. This was destiny. The Balrog's roar filled the cavern, shaking the very foundations of Moria. Smoke poured from its form, rising in thick, curling tendrils that devoured the light, turning the air itself into a swirling void. Fire dripped from its blade like molten gold, the bridge trembling beneath its fury. But still, Gandalf stood unyielding, his white light flickering like a lone star in an endless abyss. His staff remained planted into the stone, the veins of magic pulsing outward, wrapping around the very bones of the mountain. The Fellowship could only watch helpless as the battle unfolded. Frodo clutched the hilt of Sting, his knuckles white, his breath shallow. The weight of the ring seemed heavier now, pressing against him, as if sensing the immeasurable power before him. Aragorn and Boromir stood poised, hands on their weapons, though they knew their steel would be useless against such a foe. Legolas, keen-eyed even in the gloom, could see the fire dancing unnaturally around Gandalf's staff, tendrils of flame twisting in defiance of their master's will. The Balrog struck. Its great sword of fire came down like a hammer from the heavens, a blow meant to cleave through stone, through flesh, through time itself. Gandalf met it with Glamdring, and the cavern exploded in a blinding collision of light and darkness. The impact sent shockwaves through the bridge, cracks webbing outward, chunks of stone tumbling into the abyss below. The magic in the air grew thick, electric, as though the very air had become a battlefield. Gandalf pushed forward, his voice ringing out, laced with power. "You shall not pass." The words were more than a command. They were a binding, an immutable law spoken into the very core of existence. The Balrog faltered, its fiery form rippling, as if something ancient within it recognized the truth in the wizard's words. For a heartbeat, the flames dimmed, shadows twisting unnaturally, caught in the web of magic that now surrounded them both. But the demon was not defeated. With a furious bellow, it reared back, its whip snapping forward, striking like a serpent. The glowing tendrils coiled around Gandalf's staff, the force nearly wrenching it from his grip. He gritted his teeth, resisting, pouring his will into the staff, forcing the flames to recoil. The whip cracked again, catching the edge of his robes, searing fabric, trailing smoke as he twisted to avoid the worst of the strike. The bridge beneath them groaned. The cracks widened. One more blow, and it would not hold. Gandalf knew it. He could feel the shift in the magic, the mountain's response to the battle that was tearing through its foundations. If he did not end this now, it would not be just the bridge that fell. The cavern, the halls, perhaps even the entire mountain, would collapse in ruin, burying all beneath endless stone. The Balrog raised its sword once more, its eyes burning with rage, ready to deliver the final strike. Gandalf took a step forward, raising his staff high. His voice, though ragged from the strain of battle, rang clear. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor." His words sent ripples through the cavern, the air itself bending around the magic contained within them. The Balrog hesitated, something in those words reaching into the depths of its ancient memory. It had been created in flame, but not the pure fire of Anor. It had been twisted, corrupted, bound to shadow. Gandalf's light flared brighter. His grip tightened on Glamdring. And then, with all his strength, he drove his staff into the bridge once more. The force of it sent a shockwave through the stone, a final surge of power that tore through the ancient rock. The bridge shattered. The Balrog let out a roar of fury as the ground beneath its feet crumbled. The massive form of shadow and flame plunging into the abyss. Its whip lashed out wildly, catching the edge of the stone, trying to pull itself back. Fire and darkness swirled as it fell, its form spiraling into the depths of Moria. Gandalf stood, breath heaving, watching the monster vanish into the void. Victory, and then a snap. The whip lashed upward, and in a flash of fire and darkness, it coiled around Gandalf's ankle. The wizard's eyes widened. He staggered, the broken edge of the bridge crumbling beneath his feet. The Fellowship cried out in horror. frozen in helpless terror as their guide, their protector. Their friend was wrenched from solid ground. For the briefest moment, Gandalf locked eyes with them, and then he was gone, pulled into the abyss. The fall was endless. Cold wind howled past Gandalf's ears, the darkness swallowing him as he plunged into the abyss. The air was thick with heat and ash, a suffocating blend of shadow and fire. Yet there was no end in sight, only the endless void of Moria's depths. Above, the broken bridge had vanished, the echoes of the Fellowship's cries lost in the chasm's gaping maw. But the Balrog had not vanished. It fell alongside him, its massive form twisting in the blackness, wreathed in flame, its eyes locked onto his. This was no beast that could be felled by a broken bridge. It was older than the stones around them, older than the mountain itself, a thing of ancient power, born of corruption and fire. And though it fell, it did not fear. Gandalf braced himself, focusing his magic, gathering his strength. The wind screamed around him as the Balrog roared, its whip lashing out once more, striking toward him like a viper. He barely twisted in time, the burning coils slicing through the air just past his shoulder, the heat searing his skin. Then came the sword, great, flaming, forged in the darkness of the Elder Days, swinging toward him with devastating force. Glamdring met it with a thunderous crash. Sparks erupted, casting eerie flashes of light in the abyss. The impact sent them both spinning wildly, locked in their deadly descent, neither willing to give the other ground. Again, the Balrog struck, its massive blade cutting through the void, each blow carrying the weight of centuries of wrath. And again, Gandalf countered, his sword a beacon against the dark. But there was no footing here, no ground to stand upon, only the endless fall. The battle had become something beyond physical, a clash of magic, of will, of two ancient forces bound to a fate neither could escape. The darkness around them rippled with power, the very air bending beneath the strain of their combat. Far below, something loomed in the abyss. A lake. Its surface was black, endless, its depths unknowable. It swallowed all light, a void within a void, yet it approached with terrifying speed. And then, impact. The world shattered into chaos as they plunged into the freezing waters. The force of it sent waves rippling outward, steam rising in great billowing clouds as the Balrog's flames met the icy abyss. Gandalf was swallowed whole, the cold slicing into his bones, dragging him into the murky deep. The darkness pressed around him, suffocating, ancient. For a moment, he knew nothing but silence, the crushing weight of the water drowning out all sound, all thought. And then fire. The Balrog erupted from the depths, its flames renewed, boiling the water around it, turning the lake into a churning storm of heat and fury. It came for him, relentless, its massive form cutting through the blackness, its whip trailing tendrils of smoke that curled through the water like living shadows. Gandalf pushed forward, his body heavy, his magic dimming from the toll of battle. But he could not stop. Not now. He reached for Glamdring, its glow barely piercing the darkness, and with a final surge of will, he struck. The blade cut deep, driving into the Balrog's side, a wound that sizzled and hissed against its fiery form. The demon let out a bellow, the cavern itself trembling at the sound. But still, it did not fall. Together, they sank into the depths of Moria's underworld, where no light had ever touched, where the bones of forgotten ages lay undisturbed. Here, beneath the world, their battle was far from over, and Gandalf knew if he was to triumph, he would have to fight until the very end. The waters churned with heat and fury, steam rising in thick clouds as Gandalf, and the Balrog sank deeper into the abyss. The lake, dark and fathomless, swallowed them whole, its depths untouched by the light of stars, its silence broken only by the distant echoes of their struggle. The ancient cavern walls trembled as raw power clashed beneath the surface, unseen forces shaping the fate of Middle-earth in a battle beyond mortal reckoning. Gandalf struggled against the weight of the water, his robes billowing, his limbs heavy, the cold pressing against his bones like a great unseen hand. The Balrog's fire did not die. It seethed and roared beneath the waves, its body a smoldering ember refusing to be extinguished. Boiling currents swirled around them, twisting into whirlpools of fire and shadow. The heat so intense it split the very stones at the lake's edge. Then, with a surge of power, the Balrog lunged. Its whip lashed through the water, slower now, but no less deadly, trailing burning tendrils that curled like living things. Gandalf turned, barely avoiding the strike, the force of it sending shockwaves through the abyss. His grip on Glamdring tightened as he twisted in the current, the sword a flickering beacon in the darkness. The Balrog came again, its molten eyes burning with unrelenting fury, its blade cutting through the deep with a hiss that sent tendrils of steam rising toward the unseen ceiling above. Gandalf struck. His sword met the Balrog, and the impact sent ripples of force rolling through the black waters. The cavern itself groaned under the weight of their battle, ancient stone shifting, unsettled by the sheer might of the combatants locked in their struggle. Blow after blow they exchanged, the abyss their battlefield, the cold pressing in from all sides, while fire burned bright between them. Then from the depths, the current shifted. A great force pulled at them, unseen but undeniable, dragging them downward. The weight of the ages pressed against Gandalf's chest, and for the first time, he felt the true depth of this place, the darkness that lay waiting beneath Moria, beneath even the deepest minds. It was a force older than the Balrog, older than himself, a presence that had slept through the ages, undisturbed until now. The Balrog felt it too. For the briefest moment, its fury wavered, its eyes flickering with something that almost resembled recognition. But the moment passed, and with another roar, it surged forward, heedless of the abyss dragging them down. Gandalf could fight no longer in the water. If he remained here, if he allowed himself to be swallowed by the lake's endless grasp, he would never emerge again. He turned his focus upward, toward the distant echoes of stone high above. He needed to rise. He needed to climb. And so, summoning the last reserves of his strength, he struck one final blow. Glamdring drove deep into the Balrog's chest, piercing its molten core, sending cracks of light through its blackened hide. The demon let out a howl that shook the very bones of the mountain, a sound of rage and pain that rattled the ancient foundations of the world. But it did not die, not yet. Using the force of his strike, Gandalf willed himself upward, pushing away from the sinking form of his foe. The waters resisted him, dragging at his limbs, but he fought against them, fought toward the surface, toward the world above. The Balrog, wounded but relentless, followed. Their battle was not yet over. The depths could not hold them. Gandalf burst from the lake, gasping as the cold air of the cavern rushed to greet him. The surface of the water, now a roiling tempest of heat and steam, trembled as the Balrog rose behind him. Its flames rekindled, its molten form burning hotter than ever. Though wounded, the demon's fury had not waned. It climbed from the abyss with unnatural grace, its whip coiling through the mist, its sword glowing like the heart of a dying star. Gandalf pulled himself onto the jagged rocks, his limbs aching from the battle, his strength pushed to its limits. But he could not rest. The Balrog was relentless, and it would not stop until one of them had fallen for good. This was no longer a mere duel. This was a reckoning, a conflict that had been waiting since the birth of the world itself. The chamber around them, vast and ancient, groaned as their presence disrupted the deep magics buried in the stone. Runes, long dormant, flickered to life upon the cavern walls, pulsing with the echoes of forgotten power. Here, where no mortal had ever set foot, the foundations of Middle-earth trembled. The world itself seemed to recognize the weight of their battle. The Balrog struck first. Its sword cleaved through the mist, its molten edge cutting a path of destruction toward Gandalf. The wizard barely dodged, rolling aside as the rock where he had stood melted into slag. He rose, staff in one hand, glamdring in the other, his breath ragged, but his resolve unbroken. The Balrog came again, pressing its advantage, its whip cracking through the air, tendrils seeking him like living things. Gandalf countered, raising his staff, summoning light into the cavern's oppressive dark. Power surged through him, ancient and unyielding, and with a cry that echoed through the hollow depths, he brought Glamdring down in a brilliant arc. The sword met the Balrog's whip, severing its burning tendrils, sending embers spiraling into the void. But the demon did not fall. It pressed on, relentless, its strength undiminished, its rage burning ever brighter. And so Gandalf turned to the only path left. He ran upward toward the spiraling tunnels that led away from this cursed place, toward the higher halls where the mountain's air was thinner and the weight of the world less crushing. He did not flee from battle, he led it. He climbed the jagged stone, feeling the presence of the Balrog behind him, relentless, following like the doom that had shadowed the world since the First Age. Its heavy footfalls shook the cavern, its flames casting wild shadows along the crumbling walls. Higher they climbed, through tunnels untouched by time, past great pillars carved by forgotten hands, past the silent halls where echoes of dwarven voices still lingered in the stone. The Balrog roared, its rage filling every crevice of Moria, its fury shaking the very roots of the mountain. It would not let him escape, but Gandalf was not escaping. He was leading it to the only place where this battle could end. The peak of Zurich-Sigil. Chase through the mountain was endless, a climb through shadow and ruin, through forgotten halls and narrow passageways where even the echoes dared not linger. The Balrog followed, tireless, unrelenting, its flames searing the very walls as it moved. Gandalf pressed on, his body weary, his breath shallow, but his will unbroken. Every step carried them higher, through tunnels once carved by dwarven hands, past ancient forges now cold and lifeless, past towering statues whose faces had long since crumbled into dust. Higher, always higher. The walls trembled with each roar of the Balrog, the cavernous depths shaking, as if the mountain itself wished to cast them out. And then, at last, they reached the summit. Zurich-Sigil. The world opened before them, vast and endless, the sky stretching overhead in an expanse of swirling storm clouds and piercing stars. The wind howled, sharp and biting, carrying with it the taste of snow and stone. The peak stood high above Middle-earth, the land stretching in every direction, unseen through the veil of mist and frost that clung to the heights. Gandalf turned. The Balrog emerged from the tunnel, its great frame wreathed in fire, its molten eyes burning with rage. Here, upon the summit, there was no more darkness to shield it, no more walls to contain its fury. The fire that had burned so bright in the depths of Moria now met the open sky, its glow stark against the cold silver of the storm. This was the end. Gandalf raised Glamdring. The the sword gleaming even in the half-light of the storm. The Balrog brandished its great flaming blade, its whip curling and snapping in the wind. They stood for a moment, unmoving, two forces as old as the world itself, bound by fate to this final reckoning. Then they clashed. Lightning split the heavens as their weapons met, thunder rolling across the peaks of the misty mountains. The storm raged around them, the wind screaming as fire, and light warred upon the summit. The Balrog struck with fury, its blade cutting arcs of flame through the air, each swing a force that could sunder stone. Gandalf met each blow, his strength renewed, his power surging as if drawn from the very storm that surrounded them. The battle raged on day and night, their forms locked in an endless struggle, their strikes shaking the very mountain beneath them. The storm watched in silence, as if the world itself knew that this was a battle not just of might, but of fate. And then, at last, the tide began to turn. Gandalf's strength did not wane, but the Balrog's flames flickered, its fire dimming against the unyielding cold of the summit. It had been a creature of the deep, of shadowed halls and buried ruin. And here, beneath the open sky, it faltered. It lashed out, desperate now, its strikes wild, reckless. Gandalf pressed forward, with one final, mighty blow Glamdring cut through the demon's blade, shattering it into molten fragments that scattered across the mountaintop. The Balrog staggered, its form wavering, the flames in its eyes dimming. Gandalf raised his staff, the wind rising in a deafening crescendo, the power of the heavens surging around him. And then he struck. The mountain trembled as Gandalf brought his staff down, unleashing a final surge of power that roared through the storm. Light erupted from the point of impact, a brilliance that rivaled the lightning overhead, swallowing the darkness, the fire, the very essence of the Balrog being. The demon staggered back, its molten form writhing, its great wings of shadow folding inward as though the force of the heavens themselves had turned against it. The wind screamed around them, the sky a churning mass of storm and fury. But Gandalf stood unmoved, his gaze locked on his enemy. The Balrog let out a final, deafening roar, a sound that echoed not just through the mountains, but through time itself. A cry of defiance, of rage, of something deeper, something almost like recognition. And then it fell. The demon's massive form collapsed, its fire flickering one last time before being extinguished. Its body, once wreathed in unquenchable flame, was now a husk of blackened stone, crumbling as it tumbled from the peak of Zurich Sigil. The wind swallowed it whole, carrying its remains down into the abyss, into the forgotten depths of Middle-earth, where no shadow would ever rise from it again. Silence fell over the mountain, the storm began to subside, its fury spent, as if it too had been part of the battle and now lay at rest. The sky lightened, the first hints of dawn breaking through the thinning clouds. For the first time in an age, the peak of Sigil stood empty, its frozen summit untouched by shadow. Gandalf swayed where he stood. His robes, once gray, were torn and scorched, his body drained beyond all measure. He had won, but he had given everything. He could feel it, the last remnants of his strength slipping away, his spirit fraying at the edges. This body, this form, could carry him no longer. He collapsed to his knees, the weight of the battle pressing upon him, heavier than the mountain itself. His vision blurred, the world fading to white, and he felt himself drifting away from the stone, away from the cold, away from the storm-touched peak where his final stand had been made. Then a whisper, soft, distant, yet familiar. A call from beyond the circles of the world, from the place where only the greatest of his kind might go when their task was complete. He was not dying. He was being called. Darkness folded around him, but it was not the abyss of shadow. It was something else, something greater. A passage beyond time, beyond flesh, beyond the weight of mortality. And as the last embers of his vision faded, he understood. This was not the end. He would return, transformed, renewed, reborn, and Middle-earth would know him not as Gandalf the Grey, but as Gandalf the White. The end